I guess that then we're getting down to really saying God's moral law is inclusive of the 10 commandments. Not just that there's overlap, but it's actually inclusive. These commandments, now I'm trying to think about how you expressed it. You said those 10 commandments were known to Adam.
And that they're eternal, known in the mind of God first, and then in human history, in the created order, those 10 commandments didn't just come to Israel at the moment of Mount Sinai and Moses, but they were written on Adam's heart. And we would look at Romans chapter 2, Romans 1, natural revelation. We can see, certain attributes of God can be known, clearly known, even to the Gentile, the unregenerate person by what he has made. So that's natural revelation. But natural law, and I'm not using it in the John Lockean kind of way, but natural law in a theological biblical way, that's not natural revelation, Romans 1, natural law, Romans 2, that the Gentiles are a law unto themselves, Paul says, because their own conscience would testify against them, even if they've never received a single page of the Torah or anything like that. They instinctively know that murder is wrong and therefore are morally culpable.
But you would include the entirety of the 10 commandments. I think this is where maybe me and you, at least at the starting point, would be different. I would say there's overlap with the 10 commandments. So like murder, theft, even idolatry. I think that because God is revealed in creation, that it would be a natural understanding, an innate human understanding that we'd be accountable for, just as Scripture says, they're without excuse, right? Romans 1. So like, idolatry. But when you get to say the Sabbath, it's probably the biggest dividing point. So maybe we could talk about that a bit. But my view is that the 10 commandments were not. They overlap the moral law. They don't represent God's sort of overarching moral law, such that Adam would have known. And I'm willing to change my mind, but such that Adam would have known that he was supposed to rest on the Sabbath. I
think so. I think Adam did know to rest on the Sabbath. Go ahead. Sorry, I'm sorry.
Okay, no, go ahead. But this helps. Like here's like a point where so there isn't just overlap with the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments is maybe even the pinnacle representation of God's moral law.
Yes.
And it's all inclusively necessary and known to all mankind intuitively or in some natural fashion.
That would be the Reformed view, is that the 10 Commandments is synonymous with the moral law. It is the moral law. And to further confirm what you're saying, that the 10 Commandments is, we would use the phrase summary law. And so basically, you have ceremonial law, civil law, moral law. The civil law that God gives to Israel, both the Westminster and the 1689 would say that the civil law was uniquely given to Israel in that dispensation. And that doesn't make you a dispensationalist, but just that time period under that old covenant given to the nation state of Israel. And it was unique to Israel, and that it has been abrogated. Now, the word abrogated is helpful because in all three divisions of the law, moral, which again, I'm saying is synonymous with the 10 Commandments, and that the Decalogue, the 10 Commandments, is summary law of all the morals that God has given to people and written on their hearts in every time period, every tribe, every tongue, every language, that God has given his moral law, which is the 10 Commandments, as summary law for what God demands of people. The thing about the civil law, that's moral law, 10 Commandments, that's eternal. That comes before the nation state of Israel is organized and it lasts. It's still here today. Now, Jesus, what's important to understand is Jesus fulfilled all three divisions of the law, the whole of the law, moral, ceremonial, and civil. But the moral law, it's important to understand Jesus fulfilling the law and Jesus abrogating the law are distinct. Those are two different things. So the Reformed tradition, 1689 and Westminster, would say that Jesus actually abrogated, he fulfilled, but also abrogated the civil code given to Israel. But then it specifically says in the Confessions, the general equity still remaining. And that's what the Apostle Paul does. And I appreciate the Apostle Paul doing this as a pastor who is paid vocationally. He's taking a civil code about oxen. Do not muzzle the ox when he treads the grain, but then he takes that civil code and he gets down to the general equity, the moral fabric, the blueprint morality underneath it, the principle, and he says, and this applies to why you should pay someone if they're working hard and preaching the word of God. And so that's the Apostle Paul saying, okay, it's not a 1-to-1 ratio of the civil code in Israel is now still the civil code in America. I don't have a border around my roof, but the general what you're getting at in this understanding, and this is kind of a general equity theonomist, so there's a spectrum, theonomists disagree, but a general equity theonomist, what he's trying to say is this, that the moral law of God makes sense, it's eternal, it's right, and it's good, but also even the civil law of God is not arbitrary. And I think there's so many Christians today that think that, okay, maybe the 10 Commandments, I don't know about the fourth commandment with the Sabbath, but all these civil codes, God was just kind of a stickler. He gave so many different rules and regulations to Israel. And what they're saying, although they may not verbalize it exactly, but they really in their heart of hearts think that God is arbitrary in his law giving. And so what we're saying is, no, there was a general equity behind every single one of those hundreds of civil codes, and the one-to-one ratio of apply that civil code in Israel and now apply it in America, that's not how we do it, but there is a reason behind each civil code, and that is eternal. And the reason why the general equity of the civil code still stands today is because the general equity of every civil code is actually one of the 10 Commandments. It is the moral law.
It would seem to me that that would create a lot of room for varied interpretations of how government should be run in that realm of, here's the one-to-one correspondence of what I think is the principle behind this law. Although I would say, let me just say, here's some things I totally agree on, right? Jesus fulfilled the entirety of the law. I even agree that it can be helpful to talk about civil, ceremonial, these different branches of the law and moral. But I also would see them as overlapping in all sorts of ways, and probably a lot of people would, I imagine. And I agree with the principle. I do agree that with the Old Testament, we do principleize things. We don't turn them into rules that we follow today in the same fashion, but we do try to understand the reason behind it. And so for example, if the reason behind the ceremonial law was to point to Christ, well, then the reason is to point to Christ. There you go. If the reason behind it was to prevent abuses and the manipulation and abuse of the powerful over the weak or something, then we recognize that that's a principle we should incorporate in our culture and stuff like that. But I don't try to do it one-to-one exactly. Right. Personally, I don't know that that's just because it's done sometimes. Does that mean it becomes this sort of thing where I do go throughout the entire Old Testament law and I basically write new laws for a government, trying to find one-to-one correspondence of something from each law?
Which is kind of what King Alfred did in Great Britain. That's where we get the whole concept of case law. First originated with King Alfred, and then later on, that's ultimately became the bedrock and the fabric behind the American experiment, was this case law system. And what I mean by that, the civil code given to Israel, we would say is case law. The 10 Commandments, the moral law, we would say is summary law. So you have this big summary. That's the general equity, the big principle of God's morality, his standard, his transcendent, universal, holy standard for all people in all times and all places. And then case law from the summary law, case law that has its root in this transcendent moral law. And so in that sense, it's universal, but it does have particular applications based off of culture and time and place and technology, right? So a precipice around the roof, people say, well, we don't do that in America. And I would say, well, wait a second. I don't know many 2-story houses with a balcony that don't have a border. And the only reason we don't have the border on the roof is because we don't hang out on the roof. In Israel, they did hang out. You know what I mean? But we still have the principle of high up places where someone can fall needs some kind of walling to esteem human life. And the principle, the general equity, roots back in terms of the 10 Commandments. Primarily, that would be the 6th commandment: "Thou shalt not murder." Stated in the positive sense, thou shalt esteem and protect the sanctity of human life created in the image of God. And we could apply that even to our technology. So getting a same transcendent principle, universal principle, but with relevant and differing applications based off of things such as technology and cultures. We could talk about speed limits or seat belts. Now, I would bifurcate speed limits and seat belts, because seat belts, I think that that if I'm driving in a car by myself, I think that I have a right not to wear a seat belt. Now I do wear a seatbelt because I'm a law-abiding citizen, and that's just a certain level that I would say technically is tyranny, but I don't have to stick it to the man every single day of my life. There are some things that I can just play along, and be submissive in that regard, and it doesn't go against my conscience or anything like that, or cause me to compromise my faith in Christ. But the speed limit is different than the safety belt because the speed limit is protecting others, right? And so just like a precipice on your roof. And so anyways, my point is varied application based off of time and place and technology and culture, but a transcendent universal principle underneath. Big news, really big news. Our next Right Response Conference is in the works. We've got a number of things already lined up and organized. This is what we got so far. The whole conference, 3 days long, on postmillennialism and theonomy. And the speakers, Dr. James White, Dr. Joseph Boot, Gary DeMar, and of course yours truly, Pastor Joel Webbon. We've got a great lineup. We've got great topics. If you want to find out dates and location and registration and anything else, go and visit our website, rightresponseconference.com. rightresponseconference.com.